Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. And welcome back to Achampnator Reads. The Last Elf. The last time we read chapter 20, and now we read chapter 21. The problem was how the little dragon was sleeping, wrapped up in two coils of his tail, like a little bird in a nest. Outside, the wind was wailing. In fact, it was wailing inside the grotto, too, because baby Erbrow's squeaks had shattered all the amber windows one after another, and Josh had no idea on how to repair them. But there was less wailing inside than out, and the steam from the volcano helped keep the place warm. The temperature was far from perfect, but overall it was compatible with the survival of a half-naked elf. Josh watched the dragon sleep and tried to size up the situation. How could he get a hold of some clothes? He couldn't walk around half naked. Winter was just around the corner. The snow, which had only appeared on the highest peaks for the time being, would soon submerge the world. Besides, humans didn't like elves. In all probability, they would like half-naked ones even less. And above all, they would recognize him even more quickly. A hood to hide his hair and his ears would also keep him from catching a cold and protect his head in the not unlikely situation of people throwing stones at him. How was he to teach the little dragon to read and write? He tried to recall how his grandmother had taught him, but his memory didn't go back far enough to remember a time when he hadn't been able to do it. Had there already been such a time? Or do you come into the world already able to read? Probably not. You come into the world not knowing how to do anything. Then you learn to speak, and only after you have learned to speak do you learn to read. Yes, that was definitely the sequence. First speaking, then reading. Monzer and Saya didn't actually know how to read, but they could speak. Theirs was a rather rough eloquence, leaving aside the irrationality of the thoughts that inspired them, but it was undoubtedly intelligible. How to confront the world of humans without ending up stoned to death and or flayed and or hanged and or burned alive or even killed first in one of the fashions outlined above and then burned as a corpse. The answer was an easy one. He had to find Saya and Monzer. They would take him in, help him, protect and advise him. Now, the problem shifted to the next stage. How to find Monzer and Saya. He could ask. For years and years he had spoken to no one that wasn't a dragon. He had to prepare his speech. Excuse me, Excellency. Or was it fool? Which of the two was the polite formula? He was still confused about it. No, back to the beginning. His speech would have to be prepared in an impeccable fashion. If he made a mistake, he would end up having stones thrown at him, which was never a desirable prospect. Excuse me, noble sir, noble lady. Do you know the dwelling place of two characters called Saya and Monzer, who are humans? Better to leave out the bit about humans. Otherwise, the person he was addressing might begin to have doubts about his membership in the human race. And he would end up having stones thrown at him anyway. Excuse me, noble sir, lady, do you happen to know the dwelling place of a woman called Saria and a man by the name of Monzer? That might do. With a great deal of luck and a few years at his disposal, perhaps even a few decades, sooner or later he would find them. But what was he what was he to do with a little dragon? Abandoning Airbrow would be intolerable. Take the dragon along? But what was he to do? How do you go about hiding a green dragon that must now weigh about 2,000 pounds? And that will have doubled in size by the end of the month. Impossible. He would have to abandon it, but not like this. Not as the dragon was today, lost in a silent desert of ignorance. He had to teach it to speak and read. Once the dragon was sufficiently instructed, he would be able to spend his time teaching himself. Even without the books that had been burned to a frazzle and the ones that had been chewed to pulp, there were still enough books to help him pass the time without suffering from abandonment or solitude. So Yarsh could leave the dragon in the library for long enough to go in search for Monzer and Sire, find himself a wife, avoid stonings, hangings, and burnings at the stake, and come back, a decade or two at the most. His human wife would certainly be happy to spend her life at the top of an inaccessible mountain along with the dragon, because you don't come across a dragon every day, and a dragon can be useful when it comes to lighting a fire and cooking a few beans, since human beings always have difficulties in that respect. And what situation could be more perfect than spending your entire life in a library filled with the whole of human knowledge, or at least what was left of it? He would bring up his children to read and write and to know astronomy, geometry, zoology, and dance, feeding them on golden beans and pink grapefruit, so that by never eating dead rabbits, they might grow up less uncouth than their mother and perhaps even smell a bit better than humans usually do. The plan was perfect. The problem was how? Josh tried to get down from his stalagmite. It wasn't easy because Erbrow had eaten his shoes, which had been woven from wild mandarin twigs. It had been a few days after coming out of the egg, 2 weeks before when the dragon's laterosporior fangs were emerging. They must have been giving Erbrow a great deal of trouble. And as if that weren't enough, the floor of the grotto had replaced its carpet of yellow and gold butterflies with a thick layer of bird excrement. George wasn't the only one who had noticed how much warmer the inside of the grotto was than the frost outside, and anyone could seek refuge in it through the shattered windows. The tops of practically all the stalagmites were occupied by some kind of nest. There were wrens and a few starlings, but by far the greatest number were magpies. As George couldn't help noticing, these were the most cackling, noisy, and quarrelsome of the birds, and the ones that produced the greatest volume of excrement. Tiptoeing and hopping from one clean spot to the next, the young elf reached the vines of golden beans. In a corner, a small magpie was chasing one of the last terrified butterflies, which were valiantly battling against extinction. The little bird was cackling contentedly when an enormous owl swooped down and snatched it. The little magpie didn't even have time to call out. Feathers and blood were scattered everywhere over the golden beans all over the floor and over the chest of the young elf. The uproar had woken the dragon, who opened his eyes and lifted his head from his tail. Yours joined Urbrow, darting between piles of excrement, feathers, and the remnants of bones, stripped bare by the owls. After their magnificent flight over the sea the previous day, they had come back to the library. Only the central room, isolated from everything, closed and stuffed with books, was still clean and decent, but apart from the books, not even a little canary could have got in there, let alone the two of them. Yorsh calmly got himself ready. The dragon was watching him, sleepy but alert. None of the books he had read referred to little babies, but many of the philosophical texts dealt with their education. About two birds recommended raps on the knuckles as improving the learning process, while the remaining third relied on the theory of play on focus the pupil's attention. Dragons don't have knuckles, and cudgeling a creature of more than 2,000 pounds might prove incompatible with his survival. So Yosh decided to follow the gentler methods. Education was to stimulate play. He put some beans on the ground, one bean on one side, two on the other, then all three together, and so on, up to 6. He might be able to teach language and mathematics at the same time. Bean, he said, indicating the isolated bean. He smiled and clapped his hands. Bean. B-E-A-N. Another smile, a little skip, and a clap of the hands with each letter. The dragon had raised his head and looked at Yosh, perplexed. Perplexed, but interested. It was working. Bean, Yosh repeated. B-E-A-N. One bean, two beans. Bean, beans. 1, 2. One bean, two beans. More beans. A little skip. Two little skips, more skips. Hand claps and laughter. The dragon's eyes stayed firmly on him, more and more perplexed, but more and more interested. This was clearly the right method. Bean. Beans. 1, 2. One bean, two beans. B-E-A-N. Bean. Yosh smiled. Have you been transformed into an idiot this night, O elfling, or have you always been so, and I merely failed to notice? The dragon inquired politely. And pray, excuse me, is there nothing to eat but gold beans and pink mandarins? Should I see them again, I fear I may void the contents of my stomach, and this floor is already so disquietingly salt that it could be said to resemble a latrine. That was chapter 21 of The Last Elf. Next time we read chapter 22. But for now I say, see ya.